How did one man's death lead to a national movement for change? Why is he still not discussed in most history classes? This is the case of Vincent Chin, and how he was instrumental in achieving social and governmental change to protect Asian Americans within the United States. Ever since the major wave of migration in the 1840s, Asian immigrants have made up an important part of American society. The California Gold Rush attracted many Chinese miners, as well as the job opportunities available working on the first transcontinental railroad. While they were originally valued for their labor, the public soon turned against them. The Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 prohibited Chinese workers from immigrating to the U.S. until the mid-1940s, and made them ineligible for citizenship. Chinese Americans were repeatedly targeted as victims of hate crimes, such as in the Rock Springs riot in Wyoming, because white workers feared losing their jobs and of the quote-unquote yellow peril, or the existential threat of Asian people coming to dominate the Western world. These racist public perceptions against Asians continued in the internment of Japanese people during World War II, which was fueled by fears after the attack on Pearl Harbor. Events like these contributed to consistent prejudice against Asian Americans as they were seen as outsiders by the public, which culminated in one horrific act in 1982. Vincent Chin was born on May 18, 1955 in Guangdong Province, China. He was adopted in 1961 by Lily and Benghing David Chin, who lived in Detroit, Michigan. At the time, Detroit, which had once been the country's center of auto industry, was on the decline. The oil crisis of the 1970s led to less demand for American-made cars, and more demand for new German and Japanese models that were smaller and more fuel-efficient. This led to lots of resentment as many auto workers lost their jobs, and much of the hate was directed at Japanese people, in the pattern of Asian Americans being used as scapegoats for any economic hardships. In 1982, Vincent worked as an industrial draftsman, an automotive supplier, and a part-time waiter in order to support his parents. On June 19th, Vincent and his friends were out celebrating his upcoming wedding, which was set for 9 days in the future, at a club in Highland Park, Michigan. On that night, he got into an altercation with two white auto workers, Ronald Ebens and Michael Nitz, the latter recently being laid off from the local Chrysler plant. A fistfight broke out after they began calling Chin racist slurs and saying that he was the reason that they were out of work, resulting in Vincent punching Ebens in the face. When the two groups were kicked out of the club, Ebens and Nitz pursued Chin on foot for nearly 20 minutes. When they found him at a nearby McDonald's, they held Vincent down and beat him with a baseball bat. Despite being rushed to the hospital and operations being done on his head wounds, Vincent died 4 days later, at only 27 years old.
And he was hitting him in the top of his head.
He swung the bat as if a baseball player was swinging for a home run. Full contact, full swing.
I think anybody who takes the time to go over the facts of this case and to read what people who are witnesses there, who have no motivation, no self-interest in coming forward and saying they overheard certain things, racial things. Anybody who takes the time to look at that, I think, can only conclude that there was racial motivation in this killing.
Despite there being evidence that the killing was a hate crime, Ebens and Nitz received no jail time for their actions. Wayne County Circuit Judge Charles Kaufman sentenced them to 3 years probation and a $3,000 fine each. He stated that these aren't the kind of people that you send to jail, and that you don't make the punishment fit the crime, you make it fit the criminal.
I'm no racist. I've never been a racist. I've never had anything against anybody in this whole world. And with God as my witness, that's the truth.
The public outcry was immediate. Vincent's mother, Lily, became a key leader of the cause to get justice for her son, and the Asian community of Detroit, which in 1982 was only about 7,000 people, rallied behind her. The community before this was described as small and fragmented, with most people not wanting to speak up about injustices, but this all changed in the wake of the murder. Around 80 advocates came together to form the American Citizens for Justice, as detailed in this newspaper article, an organization that put on a letter writing and phone calling campaign directed at Judge Kaufman with the goal of pushing him to change the unfair sentencing. Though focused in Detroit, the cause soon spread across the country as more people learned about the injustice and resulted in the formation of similar activist groups that called out anti-Asian hate crimes. Due to certain governmental efforts to segregate cities, such as redlining, and more natural push factors like job availability and the desire for community, lots of Asians in the U.S. still lived in ethnic enclaves like Chinatowns, Koreatowns, etc. As such, many didn't feel a common identity as Asian Americans. Indeed, this term was only coined about 20 years earlier to define the movement for Asian American rights and self-determination. This movement was inspired by and grew alongside the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s, as they both advocated for an end to the racism and oppression faced since arriving in America. The solidarity between minority groups continued, with support being voiced for the cause of achieving justice for Vincent Chin. This was seen particularly in a speech given by Jesse Jackson at a rally organized by the Asian community of San Francisco. He was a Democratic nominee for president at the time and a prominent civil rights activist.
Our hearts are made heavy by a mother who sits here with us, whose son was brutally killed just because he was. What can we do in the aftermath? Those who live, we must redefine America so everybody knows everybody fits in the rainbow somewhere.
5 years after the crime, the documentary Who Killed Vincent Chin was released. This further spread awareness about the case, as the film ended up winning the Academy Award for Best Documentary Feature. Another documentary, Vincent Who, was put out in 2009 by director Curtis Chin, who'd grown up in Detroit around the time of the murder and had known Vincent as a family friend. Vincent Chin became a symbol of the failure of the justice system and of the racism Asian Americans continue to encounter. It had the effect of bringing together various Asian communities who started to see themselves as one people with common interests. It also encouraged more people to take collective action, like protesting or joining advocacy groups. This widespread community action also spurred further investigation into the case, as people urged the government to do more to protect civil rights. Efforts by the ACJ led the U.S. Department of Justice to open a case against Ebens and Nitz to determine whether or not they'd violated Vincent Chin's civil rights. This marked the first time in history that an Asian American was involved in a federal civil rights case. The grand jury charged that his right to enjoy public accommodations without facing discrimination based on his race or ethnicity had been violated. This contributed to Ebens being sentenced to 25 years in prison in 1984. However, this was eventually overturned by a federal appeals court, and he served none of the time. Efforts and awareness also contributed to legislative changes, namely how criminals are sentenced and how hate crimes are defined and recorded. The Sentencing Reform Act ensures mandatory minimum sentences, for example, at least 25 years in prison for a felony murder, so that no one can get away with a serious crime without some form of harsh punishment. The Hate Crime Statistics Act mandates the collection of data on crimes motivated by race, religion, gender, etc., and requires the FBI to publish annual reports. This has led to more awareness on the prevalence of hate crimes in the United States and of their impacts on minority communities. However, the movement for equality is far from over. In 2021, amid the COVID-19 pandemic, hate crimes against Asian Americans reached their highest rate in decades. This was due to rhetoric used by the president and other prominent figures who believed that the virus was caused by the Chinese. This led to the Stop Asian Hate movement that demonstrated in many major cities. Efforts by the movement's founders and celebrities like Sandra Oh led to more awareness on social media of how Asian Americans are treated and discriminated against in the U.S. The history of Asians in America that is commonly taught is filled with tragedy and systemic oppression. Yet, it's equally important to learn how people have overcome these challenges, the community actions that led to real change being made. The Vincent Chin case proves how important collective action has been to making a place for Asians in American society.